Hello folks, hopefully you should be able to hear my voice. I'm going to have to, because it's quite echoey in the, I'm obviously in the labs at the moment, because it's relatively echoey, I'm going to have to kind of dip in and out with my mic, so if it disappears and goes to silence like this, don't kind of freak out too much. I will be back, but it's quite loud over the top of the backing track out of Logic the way I've got it set up, so I will kind of arbitrarily dip in and out when I'm trying to play you audio examples, and I'll do my level best to remember to turn the mic back up when I start yabbering on about music. So hopefully you guys are circling round and logging on to Blackboard as well for the weekly online class page, so that you guys can actually ask some questions via those text boxes, and I'll keep an eye on that on my laptop just to the side of me so I can circle back to any questions, etc. But I'll give it a few more minutes just to see that there's a few more people logged in and signed in, and then I'll make sure that you guys can kind of hear the stream okay. Hopefully you can. Yeah, okay, wicked, Rico can hear that, that's good. And then hopefully that you can hear Logic as well when I start playing that back. In fact, I might give that an ever so quick little run through, just to see if you guys can hear this. Pounding beats, everyone can hear the pounding beats, that's good. That makes me immensely happy. I know there's usually a few technical hitches and connection issues with any of the sort of online Blackboard courses I've kind of done so far. Hopefully it won't be the same with YouTube, and the stream will be relatively well behaved, etc. But again, if there are any issues, drop a line in the chat box and I will do my level best to circle back to them. It's George, it's at the very top. Oh, yeah, where is it? That's the top of this thread. Okay. Bill, yeah, Mitch is there. Excellent, excellent. George is there. Cool, so we got a few people. Danny's disappeared. He's like, oh, it's not a real bass, so I'm sacking it off. Okay, cool. So we've got a few people starting to jump in dribs and drabs. Again, I'll just leave this playing so that everybody can kind of check that they can hear the audio coming out of Logic, because that's going to be the super important bit. I assume everybody can kind of hear my dulcet tones through the microphone as well. So yeah, I'm just going to leave that playing and I'll turn my mic down for a sec. Okay, folks, so assuming that everybody can hear the Mad Fat Beats in the background and can hear my voice, I'll probably make a bit of a start with this project and kind of start talking through it. So Dave has very kindly asked me to come and chat to you lovely folks about essentially kind of dance music composition and sort of how the tracks are kind of put together for dance music. Now, it's not going to be the same across all genres. Obviously, this is a kind of 4 to the floor kind of club track, but a lot of the principles that are sort of contained within this track kind of ring true for an awful lot of dance music genres, and the way things are kind of put together will be very, very similar indeed. So it will be a relatively good cross-section and hopefully should prove useful to you guys. But I think the first real important thing is to play the track through from start to finish. Now, I think you guys have to write a relatively long composition. Dance music tracks used to be a good sort of 6 to 8 minutes on average. The duration of a dance music track has got shorter and shorter over the years. I think that's because of the DJ technology has kind of changed. We're not kind of using vinyl stuff and beat matching these days. We're kind of using control surfaces that do a lot of the legwork for us, so we don't need the tracks to be quite as long in order to do that. But again, these principles and these kind of things to do with structure and how the music is put together, again, rings true for more old school sort of dance music as it does for kind of new school stuff. And I'm sure there's a few producers out there that are producing sort of 8 to 10 minute kind of epic club tracks. So though I can't think of any off the top of my head, but hopefully, well, maybe you guys will write some at the end of this module. Right. So without further ado, I will play this track. Okay, so there's the track in kind of full-blown sort of Technicolor. And I just want to ask you guys and wait for your responses in the chat to see what you guys think a piece of music or a track like that's kind of all about. What's its kind of purpose? Oh, thanks, Lucy. Yeah. So what do we think? Not in terms of the track. I've seen there's some kind words coming in on the chat. But what do you think the track's all about? What's its kind of purpose? Where would you hear that? Where would you hear that played? Would you hear it at a festival hall? Would you hear it in a coffee shop? Would you hear it in the car? Hear it on the radio? Would you hear it in a nightclub? Where would you hear it in the gym? Would you hear it on a kids' TV program? Where does this piece of music kind of come? Where do we kind of expect to hear this sort of stuff, and where would we pigeonhole the track? Some suspense, yeah. So festival or a club, something to uplift you, make you feel happy and excited. Suspense, that kind of thing. Kevin and Perry. Underground club in the 90s. Bucket hats. Yeah, so it's a nightclub track, and it's a DJ track. Built for kind of clubs, essentially. Because it's definitely not in 7/4. That's a good observation. So it's because of its purpose and where this is kind of supposed to reside. There's a few kind of conventions that are kind of needed. One which has been touched on to do with it. Oh, is that Dunny? To do with its time signatures, etc. It's got to conform to a few things to kind of be standardised and fit in with the rest of the genre, with the rest of the music that it's kind of associated with its kind of subgenres and its kind of subculture identity. So we've got a club track. At the very top here, I've got the markers in. I've just retitled this so it doesn't kind of, if I make any errors, it doesn't actually ruin the original. But this is essentially how the session kind of looks for real. I haven't done any kind of tweaking to it in that sense. I haven't put all the pretty colours in just for you guys. This is just the way I kind of work with this sort of stuff. And we'll dig into the sections and have a little look and break down into these in kind of smaller detail in a moment. But the first thing I want us to kind of have a look at is the idea of the sort of structure, basically. And it follows a relatively simple sort of pattern. We've got an intro section. Not much kind of happens in there. We've got a few synth sounds and a few things, but the drums sort of slowly start building up until we've got all our kind of percussion and rhythmic elements in. At bar 33, we have the introduction of the bass line to give us some kind of groove and give us a foundation to the track. That kind of develops a little bit. We start bringing in some more synths and some more different melodies through kind of bar 49 to 64. And at that point, we kind of strip everything away and we kind of pull the rug from under everyone. And we end up with this kind of breakdown section here, which is just some piano and some chords and some stuff like that. A few little sort of special effects to kind of punctuate the atmosphere, to kind of create that suspense and that tension, create a bit of contrast from something relatively hectic to something quite calm. And then we sort of build up the excitement and try and ratchet up with the various lead synths, some sort of riser sounds and some special sound effects to kind of increase that sense of anticipation and sense of excitement. And then we've got this section here which all good dance music producers will be known as the kind of drop section. This is essentially the equivalent of our kind of most important chorus of the song in that sense. So everything has to be kind of exciting in this section. and this lasts for, I don't know, maybe another sort of 32 bars, 64 bars, something along those kind of lines. And what I've tried to do in this particular one is kind of make it a little bit exciting. So dance music is, by definition, pretty repetitive and pretty monotonous in that sense, but not necessarily in a kind of bad way. But it's very predictable, which is good because you've got DJs who are usually hammered in the nightclubs trying to play one record into another, so they need a bit of predictability. They need some stuff to kind of fall back on. Hence why we don't have the time signatures in 7/4 or any kind of math rock style tempo changes going on through the track. It needs to be relatively solid and relatively predictable in that sense. But even with that being the case, there's the opportunity to kind of increase the excitement in other ways. So there's little additional layers here. That's quite an important section. It probably doesn't look at it on aggregate, but that's quite an important section in this second sort of repeat of the drop. And just as it gets really, really exciting, again, we kind of pull the rug from under everyone, have a little kind of mini breakdown, not emotionally, but in terms of the music, we kind of drop out all the drums and all that kind of stuff, bring everything down to mainly to let the DJ actually know that the beginning of the end is kind of happening here, and we're going to start winding down the track, and essentially, in the main, from this point here, from sort of bar 130 odd out to the very end, it's almost this part in reverse. So it's almost all the bassline entry stuff that will kind of fall away pretty much, and we can kind of see it with some of those arpeggios and kind of rhythmic pluck things here in green. That down here we start basically doing things in reverse, and we're doing like a mirror image of the track from this point to let everything know that stuff's disappearing. It's got to get thinner, it's got to get less exciting. It's giving the DJs and the clubbers essentially an auditory clue that stuff is kind of winding down, and that the DJ needs to get the next record ready, rather to kind of mix out by this sort of section. And if they haven't, they'll probably be panicking, that sort of stuff. So I'm just going to have a little circle back to some of the comments, but I'm going to just play the intro again and just play up to the bassline entry, really. Okay, so stuff is a little bit kind of thinner sounding in here. Let's take the kind of drum bus example. So if we just listen to the drums in this section here compared to the other side of the orange line, we'll see that it should be kind of less impressive at the kind of start. Then every now and then bring in some different parts, some different kind of rhythmical elements to, again, just build up that excitement and tension, really. And by this sort of point, we've got our kind of full drum mix pretty much in. There's one last little part that comes in that second half of this ride. apart from that, the drums stay kind of pretty solid and pretty consistent. So the composition of that isn't particularly exciting or interesting, but I'll have a little look into some of these things. We open up the two hats parts here. They're essentially doing some relatively quick kind of 16th patterns, not perfectly sort of in unison. We've got a top row, which is obviously one kind of hi-hat sample, the bottom row that's a different one, so they're playing slightly different rhythms. They're probably panned in opposition or ever so slightly off from one another to build a bit of excitement and a bit of tension. We've got our boots and cats, offbeat hi-hat, and a similar thing with the ride. I think some of the more exciting things actually I can't really take credit for, because it's all here in these kind of top loops and these percussion elements, and we'll have a little listen to some of these. I'll just loop that round there, and we'll kind of go through these sort of one by one. So again, none of these in isolation are particularly exciting, but if we put the whole sort of subsection on with them all together on aggregate, they start to sound quite exciting. And that's the same when we kind of add in these hi-hat parts as well. And just our regular kind of 4 to the floor kick and beats 2 and 4 sort of backbeat with the snare and clap layers as well. Whoops. And then all of them sort of together actually end up being quite a big kind of drum sound, big kind of drum section. There's a few little kind of reverse crashes and crash samples as well that are put in. Oops. Things like that with lots of delays and reverb to kind of punctuate the different sort of musical sections. But essentially the drums don't really change pretty much at all throughout that track. The only thing that does happen is they kind of come in and out at the very end. They start sort of tapering off with a bit of sort of studio trickery. But in terms of the composition, the rhythms are all the same pretty much throughout. By this point, you have the whole drum track, and you can kind of just start stripping stuff away to make it thinner. This is it at its kind of fullest. And that sort of approach to sort of music composition and music production is quite common in kind of dance music, is to kind of come up with something quite good overall, and then rather than kind of change it or spend a bit of time working on making excitement with new ideas, we can kind of be a little bit lazier, copy and paste, and strip stuff away or build stuff back up. So quite often with dance music tracks, people will kind of work on an 8-bar loop or a 16-bar loop. They'll kind of come up with the ideas, the melodies, some of the harmonies, the rhythms, that kind of stuff. And then once they've got stuff sounding quite good, rather than kind of move on and then add another 16 bars and keep the whole thing evolving, they'll kind of just strip stuff out or start layering stuff up. And when it comes to kind of layering, there's good examples of this kind of thing going on with the bass. So we'll have a little look at how this is kind of put together again on a sort of individual level, and then we'll dig into the MIDI, what's kind of going on there, and some of those things. By the way, if you guys have got any particular questions about how any parts of the track are put together, put it in the chat, put it in the comments, and I'll circle back to it. But let's just have a little listen to some of the bass in the meantime. So just a very typical offbeat sub bass. Nothing special from there. We've got kind of got a pedal note and then a little kind of riff going against it on the offbeat against that pedal note that we probably won't hear because it's being pushed out of the way by the kick drum. Then we have this kind of deeper version doing something similar. But there we can at least hear the kind of pedal notes a bit more, or at least we can without the kick drum in. So we can see that all these different layers are basically playing the same part at the moment. They're just in different octaves with different kind of textures playing them. Again, nothing new here, just a different sound, different texture, but literally playing the same kind of musical part. And the same with the sort of acid bass lines as well. In fact, I'd be quite surprised if these aren't all exact carbon copies in the same octaves as well. I know we've got, when we aggregate them all together, there are a few in different octaves, but essentially all playing in unison, all playing the same riffs. Some of the MIDI notes are slightly longer or shorter than one another. But essentially all pretty much to the grid, not even kind of groove quantized or anything sort of funky like that in that particular example. But again, on aggregate, this works quite well with this type of music. Let's put those drums back in. And some of these things are kind of changing over time, so it's kind of like putting the musical expression that a guitarist might do with a wah-wah pedal, for example, something like that. We kind of do that in electronic music, usually with automation. So there'll be parameters kind of changing over time to kind of keep the interest and keep stuff kind of rolling on a little bit. And we'll look at that when we come to some of the next sections. But essentially that's how the kind of drums and bass are kind of put together. It's a relatively simple idea, and then it's sort of compartmentalized and split up to different sections to create these different sort of synth textures, these sonic textures to be put together on aggregate and work as a unit. None of them sound all that great on their own, but together with all sort of 4 or 5 of those parts working in unison, they do sound quite good. It's also quite a common trick to sort of have a big kind of pedal note. So the first half of this bass line section, it just stays on this pedal note and doesn't change, and it's actually kind of thinned out and made to sound not really like a bass line at this point. So I'm just going to get rid of the drums actually and just play this leading into the main bass section. with again a little bit of a kind of transition in terms of automation to let people know this is the equivalent. Hopefully Danny will back me up on this. This is the equivalent of a bassist kind of sliding down the open string before sort of riffing out in the next section. That's kind of what we've got here. And then we save some of the bigger bass sounds and some of the interesting textures for this section to kind of create a bit of contrast and a bit of interest, really. The same with why we've kind of separated out those little acid bass layers there. So everything's kind of building up gradually over those 64 bars. Everything's getting a little bit more exciting, a little bit more intense, really, I suppose. Part of that is these sort of sounds here, these kind of interesting little sound effects, synth risers, this kind of stuff. So let's have a little listen to, actually I'll take that synth riser out for a sec, and let's have a listen to some of this stuff.
Are you ready?
And that sort of stuff coupled with this. I need you to back me up, Danny. So yeah, with these kind of things together, all there again, on aggregate, none of them are super important on their own, but dance music is kind of keep interest on something that essentially repeats and repeats and repeats all the way through the track. You have to kind of spark interest using kind of clever little arrangement sort of tips and tricks, and put in little things that kind of change from time to time, have these sort of sound effects to kind of pepper your track with them. It's not uncommon to have, you know, about a dozen tracks of this kind of nature to create this kind of vibe. To kind of keep stuff ticking over between these sections, to kind of keep the listener's ear a little bit excited, especially if you're there in a club, enjoying yourself, shall we say. It will kind of help. All these little things will add to that kind of experience in that sense. So the next kind of thing that we have in the track, in this section, I'll look at the breakdown and we'll move across some of these bits in terms of different beats and bars, etc. We'll move through the track, but in terms of just before the breakdown, again, we've got some interesting little things, interesting little motifs that kind of come in and out, and sort of these are probably the only bits that do actually start to develop and do kind of change over the time. It's not just the same thing, although it wouldn't surprise me if when I actually wrote it, I started with maybe a version that was a bit more complicated, and then in the other sections I just went, in fact, yeah, you can literally see it there in the arrangement that things are muted so that you get that sense of progression with some of the notes and chords, etc. But essentially, it's probably, I know it's going the other way, but again, it was a copy, it was trying something out, and it's kind of taking stuff away to sort of keep things interesting with minimal amount of effort, I suppose. But let's have a little look at some of these parts. So I'll just mute my mic now, and we'll have a little butchers at some of these things. And that's it essentially. It's these two parts here, one kind of descending with these little chords, probably. So what we got there? Probably either a perfect fifth, a minor third, or maybe a minor sixth in terms of the intervals for the key signature. I think we were in F sharp minor, I would say. Most dance music is kind of written in a minor key. It's pretty rare, although not unheard of, to hear stuff in a major key, but it tends to be in that kind of moodier, darker minor key. So we've got that kind of repeating, and we're kind of drip feeding some of those ideas until we essentially hit those two sections with the full versions in. And then we've got a little kind of piano counter melody to go along with that. Very simple, nothing particularly to that. But it's just a tiny little run, a tiny little motif that again happens every 8 bars, something like that. It wouldn't surprise me if they're literally identical. Let's have a look through those. Yep, they're all the same. So we've just copy and pasted those at the end of the 8 and 16 bar sections. It probably works quite nicely with the exhale chords. So let's just go in for and out of one of those sections. And we've got this other counter melody thing here as well. Let's have a listen to that. So it's a sort of arpeggiated rhythmic riff based around those notes. Changes ever so slightly, but not massively. More with the rhythms rather than big deviations from the pitches. But this is quite a nice one. I quite like that in the track. Let's pull in some of these other little motifs, etc. So again, just building up kind of subtly, building up the kind of rhythmic excitement of these particular parts. And again, they just add a little bit of flavour and a little bit of colour to what is otherwise relatively monotonous kind of drum section and relatively sort of simple and boring kind of bass line. Again, I think I did neglect to kind of say in this bass line section here, it does kind of continue on that pedal note. It kind of adds the octaves in and adds in some of the riffs, but it's staying on that F sharp note and is pedaling against that. And then the second time the bass line kind of plays, you can see it's kind of cut up here, but these are essentially, we're kind of changing the root notes of the chord progression essentially. So it's going down from F sharp minor down to D, up to E, down to B, C sharp, and then E again. And that's the kind of harmony progression that's going underneath this stuff as it's playing those little kind of melodic riffs over the top of that bass line against those pedal notes, where in the first section it doesn't have that. Again, we kind of save that for another kind of lift with the track to kind of see how those things kind of progress over time. Next thing we've got in here are these sort of little arpeggios, and again these kind of build up from basically nothing up to something big. So let's maybe start with that second one over here. And again, everything's a kind of pedal note until this second half of the bass line. And then I'm doing a similar thing with these kind of sort of rhythmic synths. and I'm just allowing over time, but it's just an ostinato, it's just the same kind of rhythmic stuff going on, but it gets more and more intense as the track plays through. And again at bar 49 is when we kind of change the chord progression of that section. So yeah, so that's those kind of sections kind of put together like that. Oops, stop that logic. So again, it's not really contextualized properly without the kind of kick in. So let's just put the kick and maybe some of the bass line stuff back in with that section. And then if we add those kind of counter melody parts back in, we start to end up with something relatively exciting when all these different parts kind of intermix and kind of work together. If we can kind of open all the MIDI regions together and see what's going on. A lot of it will be kind of ostinatos in the same kind of octave, but we have some things kind of holding down some of the harmony sections, some different kind of rhythmic stuff going on, and a few different sort of melodic sort of flurries in these places, and a few kind of muted things from stuff that either didn't work or is kept for later. And those things, again, all these small things on aggregate kind of make a big difference, really. And it's that typical thing with sort of music production, music composition, that these things, when you add them all together, it can be quite powerful. So let's have a listen again. And then all these things have big delays and big reverbs to make them feel kind of a bit more epic. And then we're sort of onto the breakdown section, which is the actual, I should say that this is actually technically a remix, but the remix element, this is the only part of the original. That and I think some of the piano stuff, possibly that one I can't quite remember, but there's very few things that are actually original. That are actually from the original. Most of it is kind of brand spanking new for this track. But let's have a little look at how the breakdown is kind of constructed in this track. So let's just solo the whole section, and then I'll play through it, and then we'll dig it apart one by one. So this is quite a kind of deep sounding sort of section. It's made up of quite a few different string parts. There's a few interesting kind of compositional things here, I suppose, but most of the string parts, let's just take the piano to start with. Oh, sorry, it's playing the other sections in. Let's just solo that again. So all that's really happening here is the chord, the middle note of the third note of the chord, or the sus chord, or sorry, the sus note, etc., out of a normal triad is being played after the root and fifth, or the root and sixth, for example. But that's essentially what's kind of happening here. There's nothing too kind of flashy or too exciting. So if it was a C major chord, the C and the G would play, and then you would then play the E note in this kind of gap here. So that's all that's kind of happening with that harmony there. But having it with a kind of sort of darker sounding sort of piano makes it feel a little bit somber. It kind of changes up the kind of emotion of the track a little bit. And then those sort of supplemented with these different string layers and different sort of synth string and kind of paddy sounds kind of create that kind of sort of emotional suspense really before all the good stuff happens again. So again, we've got a sort of big, sort of deep bass pad for this section. So again, nothing particularly difficult or particularly intricate about it. It's just playing pedal notes there. There's only one point where it's not playing a note per bar, it's playing a note for 2 bars there, and dropping down, and that against that kind of harmony of the piano will start to make it kind of feel big and emotional by having those kind of darker sounding piano chords with a big kind of heavy bass line sort of anchor to the track, or to this part of the track anyway. And again, it's kind of repeating and not changing particularly. It does start to change a little bit when we start putting in these other string parts, and these, when we add them all up together, it's just this is probably the bit of the track that's most sophisticated in one sense, because we've got quite a lot of things happening in there. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We've got 6 notes kind of making up the harmony. It wouldn't surprise me if a lot of these are essentially octaves, and then octaves and then the interval in there, but they might not. I can't really deconstruct all of it off the top of my head, but it wouldn't surprise me if some of these chords are a sort of suspended chord stacked up on top of one another, or chord inversions, those sorts of things, to help this kind of flow and develop. But this looks a bit mental to me. I've never really looked at that chord particularly on aggregate, but it's about 1,000 notes for that particular chord. But again, it's most likely it will be octaves, inversions stacked up on top of one another across two or three octaves, etc. From different sounds. The sounds themselves could actually be playing different octaves to what is written there, and that's one of the things to be kind of wary of when writing music with soft synths and virtual instruments and plugins, etc. Is that if I was to aggregate all of those chords together, I don't know where that bloody bit's gone now. Let's open it up. If I was to aggregate all of those chords together and play them on the piano, if I had a a fourth or a fifth hand to play all those notes, it wouldn't sound particularly nice in that particular arrangement, because it would just be, all the notes would be too close together in those octaves, especially if we look the octave where it's actually written, the octave below middle C and then just above. It would probably be a bit too muddy and a bit too kind of clashy. But these are spread over kind of individual instruments and treating it more like a string section. So don't be kind of too fooled by that looks a little bit too mental. They are probably actually stacked further apart in terms of octaves, and that's probably the same for the other notes as well. But let's have a little listen to these sections one at a time, and then I'll add them all together like I was doing in the piano roll. And as we can kind of hear, these things are changing over time, so that they kind of evolve together, so that when we add all of them back in, we end up with this. Then add in this kind of counter melody here. And then play it an octave up. And part of the reason I introduced this here is because I'm actually going to play it on a big lead synth sound, so I want the listener to be a little bit familiar when this does kind of come back in this section later on. But I start adding all the excitement and snare drum rolls and big synth risers, etc., to kind of build up to this drop section here. So I'm actually just going to just change this loop region and kind of go round like so. So I'm building up the tension with a few things here. A lot of that is to do with the risers and that particular snare roll, but a lot of it's also to do with this section. And this is the first real introduction of this lead melody sound. And essentially it's just that little ostinato, and I've made the notes a little bit more staccato, and then they get a little bit longer during this section to add a bit of tension to what's going on. And again, there's an awful lot of animation going on here because it is a synth, so it needs parameters changing. It needs the equivalent of the sort of musical equivalent of the bends and all the articulation that a kind of real musician would put into their instrument, if you think a violin player or something like that. But in lieu of that, there's a lot of stuff kind of going on here to make it sort of really develop and make it really kind of sing when it gets into the main section. So it's got to start off quite thin sounding and then kind of get really big and brash for when the drop kind of kicks off. So let's have a little listen again. And then I'm kind of introducing stuff in the drop that's, I suppose, a little bit unusual. This doesn't usually happen in a lot of dance tracks, in the sense that you're kind of leading everybody on a little bit, in the sense that none of these parts have actually been introduced anywhere in the track. So this is a complete kind of bolt out the blue. And I'm just going to put these big kind of chord stabby section things on. Just made up of a couple of simple kind of chord stabs like that. That play ever so slightly different parts, play different rhythms definitely, but play a couple of different harmony notes on those little up sections. And then one that just plays the ostinato of the chords, doesn't do anything fancy. And again, I'm doing the same idea as before. I'm doing a kind of pedal tone thing here, and then I'm actually going to change the chord progression up in this section. Oops. Because this is kind of the emotional payoff of the song, really, or of the track. And then I have those little lead arpeggiated sections in there as well. And then it does get a little bit more complicated under the hood. There's a few different things that are happening. In this lead motif section, it changes up as such when the chords kind of change. But it kind of anchors it to the similar kind of musical ideas. But it also adds in essentially that piano riff from up here in this section alongside of it. So you get a big synth lead in the second bit when the chord progression kind of changes away from this pedal stuff in the first half of the drop, and the second half, or second kind of repeats of the drop, etc., changes the chord progression, adds some sort of uplifting kind of synth melodies and stuff. And then if we add those kind of simple chords but quite rhythmically interesting things under the bottom, sort of underneath, and layer those up together, this is what we end up with. And then I'll start bringing back in, again, because I want the sort of the repeat of the drop to be a little bit more exciting. So I add in some of these exhale little chord, that kind of little breathy chord sounds. Ooh, got the loop on, but so we should be able to hopefully pick those up. And again, it's anchoring back against stuff that we've already had to give it a little bit of familiarity, and these little kind of counter pluck sort of sounds as well, kind of new in this section. But again, kind of linked to some of the similar sort of sounds and timbres that we've had in before. But just to add a little bit of interest, even in sections that are quite big and quite full on. And on the repeat of the drop, again, we literally pick up and put this down over here. But in the second half, we add in some new kind of exciting acid bass sounds, and this really helps kind of lift the track. And again, it's really kind of subtle in terms of the arrangement. There's hardly anything new in there, but it gives the track a whole kind of new dimension. And again, it's probably just repeats of the other acid bass. If it's not playing the rhythms, the rhythms are baked into the arpeggios. I can't differentiate between which one's which out of those, but essentially it's that kind of ostinato-y type thing, that root and octave sort of style vibe in this section. So I'll just play this bit with the kick drum in, just from a few bars before until you get to that orange section, so you'll see what I mean in terms of giving it a lift. In fact, I'm going to just play the full track, and I'm just going to mute the acid drops and bring them back in about halfway through, about this point here, just so you can see weirdly how important they are to the kind of vibe and the groove of the track. I know we're kind of a little bit over time as well, but I'll just finish off with a few things like this, because like I say, I've shown you most of the track already, because this section is essentially the track in kind of reverse from that, building up to the breakdown from the synth outro. It's that part of the track, but kind of mirrored. So we'll just kind of finish off these things if you guys have another 5-10 minutes to kind of bear with me. So yeah, let's have a listen to this, and then I'll unmute those drop acid sounds in the drop. But the track's quite big here in terms of its aesthetic and its timbre and its kind of vibe. It's kind of quite big sounding at this point, so there's not actually too much more space to add, new parts to make it really exciting in that sense. But we can just add those in, and to me, especially in the kind of mastered sort of full fat version of this project, those points are really kind of poignant in terms of the dance floor, in terms of the track. You really expect the dance floor to be really driven on in that section, and for you to kind of enhance that excitement and that kind of emotional impact at that section. We then go to a breakdown, which is a little kind of copy and paste sort of job from here, and then essentially we're kind of winding down and playing the track as a mirrored version from sort of bar 65 to 1 is kind of what's happening from bar 131 to the outro to the end there. So that's kind of essentially the kind of makeup of the track and how it's kind of put together. So we kind of build things up slowly over time. We add in little kind of nuggets, little sort of synth patterns, little different sound effects and sounds very gradually and very kind of slowly, and then we kind of throw quite a lot of new stuff at them in the drop section here. It's a kind of you're kind of fishing them in to really kind of throw them in that section. And that's the kind of vibe, and that's the kind of idea of this track. So hopefully that's been relatively useful for you guys in terms of the structure of a dance track, how it's kind of built up, etc. I will endeavour to post some some links to it. It's obviously dance music. The sound is really kind of important, and as you can see, I'm just scrolling through my mixer page here. There's a lot of processing going on, and it's quite a big production in that sense. So there's kind of more under the hood, and if you press A, there's actually a lot of automation throughout the session that kind of really animates all this sort of stuff and makes it kind of come together in the way that it does, separate to the kind of notes in the piano roll and within the MIDI regions. But essentially it is a very, very simple kind of track, very, very simple and complicated about any of the parts. There's a bit of clever stuff going on there. There's some relatively clever stuff in terms of that sort of stacked up harmony and how that's done and how that comes together. But it's not a Beethoven symphony. It's not kind of Mozart Requiem or anything like that. It's not super. It's a relatively copy and paste type job with a little bit of nuance added in. So I'm going to wrap it up and leave it there. I will try and post later today or this evening or maybe tomorrow some links to the track on on the Blackboard module page for you guys, so you can kind of go back and have a listen at another juncture. And I'll also post some videos to do with sort of music production, sort of dance music production structure, and a bigger guide to how these sections all work and what should and shouldn't roughly be in there. But you can apply this kind of idea to do with structure to any kind of dance music track pretty much in the world, and it will broadly follow a very, very similar trajectory. We'll have a few subtleties and a few differences, but the broad brush principles will be the same. So that's it from me, guys. Thank you very much, and yeah, catch you later. Bye bye.